Welcome, I'm Andy Miocha and you are watching A News. Let's have a look at the headlines. Donald Trump's border czar says Minnesota immigration enforcement surge is ending. Ukrainian capital Kyiv comes under a new massive Russian attack. Netanyahu announces that Israel has joined Trump's board of peace during his Washington visit. Thank you for tuning in. We begin in the United States. The immigration crackdown in Minnesota that led to mass detentions, protests, and 2 deaths is coming to an end, according to border czar Tom Homan, who said that a significant drawdown of immigration enforcement forces is underway. U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement launched Operation Metro Surge on December 1st. Federal authorities say the sweeps focused on the Minneapolis-St. Paul metro area have led to the arrest of more than 4,000 people. While the Trump administration has called those arrested dangerous criminal illegal aliens, many people with no criminal records, including children and U.S. citizens, have also been detained. World leaders are gathering in Germany for the annual Munich Security Conference on Friday, with transatlantic tensions and the war in Ukraine expected to dominate discussions.
The Munich Security Conference opens on Friday, bringing together heads of state, ministers and military leaders at a time of growing strain between Europe and the United States. Analysts say the main challenge at the talks will be transatlantic tensions, with disagreements between Europe and the Trump administration over key political issues expected to dominate. The war in Ukraine will also remain central. Beyond these issues, the conference will examine a wider range of topics.
There are smaller but also important panels on regional crisis, but also on issues like technological innovation, the revolution on the battlefield like drones and artificial intelligence.
Weiss highlights a deeper challenge for European leaders. The use of force has returned as an instrument of policy. After decades of relying on peaceful conflict resolution, many Europeans are struggling to adapt to this changing security environment. Security will be tight. Up to 5,000 police officers will be deployed, with support from Austria, Switzerland, France and the Netherlands. Large demonstrations are expected, particularly on Saturday.
The largest gathering day will be on Saturday. One notable gathering is related to the events in Iran. The organizer expects up to 100,000 participants. The Munich police also expect a large number of participants. We cannot yet estimate in detail how many there will ultimately be, but Saturday will be the busiest day for gatherings. And then, of course, there will be the usual gathering of people who want to demonstrate against the Munich Security Conference.
German Chancellor Friedrich Merz is due to open the forum, while US Secretary of State Marco Rubio is expected to hold bilateral meetings on energy and NATO. Last year's gathering saw sharp criticism from US Vice President J.D. Vance over migration and free speech in Europe. Since then, relations have faced further pressure, including disputes over NATO commitments and US interest in Greenland.
Elsewhere in Europe, Belgian police has raided several European Commission offices in Brussels as part of an investigation into a 900 million euros property sale. According to the Financial Times, the deal involved 23 buildings sold to Belgium's sovereign wealth fund. Searches were carried out at multiple premises, including the budget department. The European Public Prosecutor's Office confirmed it is collecting evidence but gave no further details. The transaction took place under former Budget Commissioner Johannes Hahn, and at the time the Commission said it followed EU financial rules. No charges have yet been announced. Meanwhile, EU leaders gathered for an informal summit in Belgium to talk on ways to get Europe's economy back on track. Faced with growing trade tensions with traditional partners, the EU says addressing its economic growth is a top priority. William Denslow has more in Brussels.
Into the informal meeting of European leaders, we heard from Antonio Costa, the European Council President. He said 2025 was the year for defence, ramping up Europe's defence industrial base, industrial capacity, as well as more defence spending. 2026, though, he said, this year it's all about competitiveness. Now, he has laid out several issues that the European Union will be seeking to address. He says one crucial part is removing barriers, both internal and bureaucratic barriers. There has been plenty of finger-pointing across Europe as who is exactly to blame for this red tape that is binding European powers. Regardless of the blame game, EU leaders hope to resolve it. Another issue, scaling up companies, essentially allowing European companies to grow to be able to compete on the global stage with the likes of the US and China, especially in rapidly evolving sectors like big tech. Another issue being looked at is what more can be done when it comes to proactive trade policies. We've already seen Europe taking some steps in that department with the likes of the EU-India trade agreement, like with the trade agreement with Mercosur, that group of South American power. So signs there that the EU is seeking to try and diversify its trade portfolio during this period of geopolitical tensions and strained trade ties, even with existing important trade partners like Washington and Beijing. Another part of this as well is to certainly try and help companies against what they describe as coercive trade practices, things like tariffs, duties from other powers as well. And another key issue on the docket for the European Union is more investment, both in terms of the private and public sphere. All issues that will be discussed among leaders both at this retreat, but also for a major summit held here in Brussels next month, where essentially leaders will be seeking to try and break this cycle, break this pattern of what has been a rather anemic European economic growth of late. For A News, I'm William Denslow in Brussels.
Still in Brussels, NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte said the United States is applying maximum pressure on Russia to bring the war in Ukraine to an end. Speaking at a meeting of NATO defense ministers, he highlighted U.S. sanctions on Russian oil companies and weapons deliveries to Ukraine. Rutte dismissed concerns over the absence of U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, saying Washington must balance NATO with other priorities.
The US is putting every pressure on Russia, as the Europeans are doing, through the sanction packages. Look what has been happening with Lukoil and Rosneft and all the other stuff the US is doing. The US is still delivering crucial air defense and other lethal weapons into Ukraine through this Pearl program, so paid for by Canadian, European allies and partners. And the US is leading the peace effort. And there is only one country, the most powerful nation on earth, the US, which can do that under the leadership of President Trump, breaking the deadlock with Putin, getting the peace process going. So I really think the US is doing exactly what we need when it comes to Ukraine.
Now on the ground, massive overnight attacks hit Ukraine's biggest cities, with Kyiv, Kharkiv, Dnipro and Odessa targeted by missiles and drones. In the capital, Kyiv, both residential and non-residential buildings were struck, though no casualties were reported and emergency teams were dispatched. In Odessa, a drone attack injured one person and sparked fires in an apartment building and an infrastructure facility. Ukraine's Air Force said Russians launched 24 ballistic missiles, a cruise missile and more than 200 drones overnight. Ukrainian athlete Vladislav Heraskevich has been disqualified from the Winter Olympic Games over his decision to wear a helmet featuring images of fellow athletes killed in the war with Russia. The 27-year-old was informed of his disqualification after meeting with the International Olympic Committee president shortly before the start of the competition.
23, I think.
Skeleton racer Vladislav Heraskevich will not compete at the Winter Olympics after he failed to reach an agreement with the IOC over using a memorial helmet. Heraskevich had been with the headgear while training in Italy, but the IOC said he would not be able to compete with it in the competition. because of a rule banning political statements in the fields of play. The helmet commemorates 24 Ukrainian athletes killed in the war, some of whom were his friends. Sports people featured on the headgear include teenage weightlifter Alina Perehudova, boxer Pavlo Ivchenko, and ice hockey player Alexei Loganov, among others. Heraskevich said his team said they would appeal the disqualification at the Court of Arbitration for Sport. The Olympic Charter says that no political, religious or racial propaganda is permitted in any Olympic sites, including fields of play or podiums. But athletes can express themselves freely elsewhere. Kirsty Coventry, IOC president, said an agreement couldn't be reached with Heraskevich about wearing the helmet in the field of play.
As you've all seen over the last few days, we've allowed for Vladislav to use his helmet in training. No one, especially me, is disagreeing with the messaging. The messaging is a powerful message. It's a message of remembrance. It's a message of memory, and no one is disagreeing with that. The challenge that we are facing is that we wanted to ask or come up with a solution for just the field of play, for just the, I know he's very quick, so I think it's 2 minutes, to not be wearing the helmet on the field of play.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky criticized the IOC's decision to disqualify Heraskevich. Writing on X, he said the helmet was about honor and remembrance.
Sport shouldn't mean amnesia, and the Olympic movement should help stop wars, not play into the hands of aggressors. Unfortunately, the decision of the International Olympic Committee to disqualify Ukrainian skeleton racer Vladislav Heraskevich says otherwise. This is certainly not about the principles of Olympism, which are founded on fairness and the support of peace.
The 27-year-old previously displayed a sign saying "No war in Ukraine" after a skeleton run at the Beijing 2022 Winter Olympics days before Russia's invasion. At the time, the IOC said that Heraskevich would not face repercussions for displaying the sign, calling it a general call for peace.
Ever since it started its full-scale invasion of Ukraine, Russia has been struggling with a serious shortage of workers. The country has been increasingly relying on Indian and other foreign labor to fill the gaps.
Russia is increasingly turning to Indian workers to tackle a severe labor shortage, made worse by the war in Ukraine. Officials say Russia faces a shortage of 2.3 million workers. Work permits for Indians jumped from 5,000 in 2021 to nearly 72,000 last year, almost a third of the migrant visa quota. On farms and in textile factories, they are earning about 50,000 rubles a month, around $660. Businesses say many local Russians are unwilling to accept.
The situation with workforce in the labor market is grave. This is why we got quotas and formally employed these people. We had Uzbeks, sometimes Tajiks, and of course Russians.
There is not much money in India. In India there is little money, but here there is a lot of money. The work is here. Yes, here it is good. In India there is not much money.
The shortage is partly because fewer workers are coming from nearby Central Asian countries like Uzbekistan and Tajikistan due to stricter migration rules, a weaker ruble, and rising anti-immigrant sentiment, according to Reuters. Local Russians are also less available, with many leaving for better-paying jobs, moving abroad, or discouraged by rising taxes, inflation, and a declining workforce caused by long-term demographic pressures like war casualties and population decline have also reduced the workforce. For now, Indian and other foreign workers are helping to fill critical gaps in Russia's struggling workforce.
U.S. President Donald Trump said no final agreement has been reached on Iran following his meeting with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in Washington. This comes as Netanyahu announced Israel is joining Trump's Board of Peace.
Israel is the latest country to join US President Donald Trump's Board of Peace Initiative. A United Nations Security Council resolution authorized the board in mid-November, along with participating countries, to establish an international stabilization force in Gaza. The initiative was intended to oversee the territory's temporary governance. Trump later said the body, with him as chair, would be expanded to address global conflicts. The announcement came after Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu met with Trump and Secretary of State Marco Rubio in Washington on Wednesday. The leaders met to discuss Washington's resumed nuclear negotiations with Tehran, with Netanyahu emphasizing Israel's security concerns. Trump described their talks as very good, but said no definitive agreement had been reached regarding Iran. In a post on social media, Trump praised the relationship with Tel Aviv. Netanyahu had been expected to urge Trump to broaden the discussions beyond Iran's nuclear program to include restrictions on Tehran's missile arsenal and other security threats. Netanyahu's visit to Washington marked his 7th meeting with Trump since the president returned to office nearly 13 months ago.
After a short break, we'll take a closer look at the current state of the transatlantic alliance and the flurry of diplomacy in Europe this week. Stay with us.
As America sleeps, Europe is waking, and the East has begun its day. A News is right here at the center, bringing you the latest stories as they break. I'm Nadia Jani, here with you each weekday morning to share latest world news and the stories shaping our region. Across all platforms and wherever you get your news, we explore the context behind the big headlines. Live from Baku, I bring you a diverse mix of regional and international news, sport and politics for you, an audience that wants a bit more. So join me Monday to Friday for the latest headlines, expert analysis and live updates from around the world. Around the globe and live from Baku, this is Daybreak here on A News.
Welcome back. Now, joining us to examine the latest messages between transatlantic partners and the state of the alliance today is John Kavulik, senior editor at Issue Insight, coming to us from Brussels. Welcome, John. Great to have you on the program. Let's start with the newly launched Arctic Sentry. NATO says it launched the mission to bolster its presence and bring all activities by allies in the region under one command. Nevertheless, how much of this would you say is an attempt to get on the US president's good side following the entire Greenland episode?
All of it, 100%. It would not have happened had President Trump not decided that, like that decades ago video game Pac-Man, that he wanted to devour Greenland. It's another example of him being, call it unorthodox, call it provocative, call it bullying, but he often is able to get a result that is material and that makes some sense. It's just the process he uses to get to that result is generally just exhausting. And that's what we've had here.
Over there in Brussels, at a meeting of NATO defense officials, we've heard a rather conciliatory message from the U.S. Undersecretary for War, saying it was time for the U.S. and Europe to, quote, march out together. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, Eldridge Colby, Undersecretary of Defense for Policy, a little bit of controversy because Defense or Secretary of War, Hegseth isn't here and Eldridge is here. But Eldridge being here, as Secretary General Rutte very much wanted to let everybody know that he is a policy guy, and he's the guy that looks 5, 10, 15 years down the road. And he is very close to Secretary of State Marco Rubio, very close to Vice President J.D. Vance. And So, they were trying to make the case from an optics standpoint that just because the defense secretary wasn't, that it didn't mean the U.S. thought any less of NATO. And with, Undersecretary Colby's, statement, it was received well, but we're now a year and basically a month into the Trump second term and final term. Everyone here is sort of used to what's coming. They can pretty much script it out. So the statements that this is welcomed, et cetera, it's a lot of forced welcoming, but nevertheless, they just don't have any choice. This is what the U.S. is going to do. NATO is going to continue, at least for the next 3 years, to be less about the U.S. having a operational role and more about the U.S. having a supplying role. If NATO wants to buy it, the U.S. will sell it.
Now, today, also in Belgium, EU leaders met for an informal summit to talk on how to cut red tape and become more competitive. With a track record of differences between them, do you expect the Europeans to find a somewhat unified response to what they perceive as Chinese and U.S. pressure?
Yeah, you use the word. It is unanimity. That it is incredibly difficult for the EU, the 27 members of the EU, to find consensus. Here in Brussels with NATO operates on unanimity. It's everyone agrees or it doesn't happen. With the European Union, it's for most decisions, everyone needs to agree. But for some decisions, they can have a qualified majority, so fewer than 27. And for some others, it's majority. And so the problem for the European Union, Ursula von der Leyen, the president of the European Commission, and Antonio Costa, the president of the European Council, is you've got 27 cats, and they all want to be the cat. They're all heads of state or heads of government in their own right. Von der Leyen and Costa are not, and they want to retain their sovereignty. Their politicians that are elected within their countries want to maintain their sovereignty, and the voters who elect them and the taxpayers who fund them in those countries also want to maintain sovereignty. So when the EU says we want to cut red tape, we want to be more dynamic, a lot of these countries are saying that may be fine, but we're going to lead you, you're not going to lead us. An unelected bureaucracy is not going to lead an elected government. And that becomes the big problem here. They're meeting at a castle outside of Brussels. They're going to have a nice dinner. They'll make nice speeches. Chancellor Merz and President Macron, Chancellor Merz of Germany, President Macron of France, they arrived together and putting on a good face. But in the end, all 27 of these countries are competitors with one another. And then they try to figure out where they have commonalities and see what they can do to be more competitive to a very aggressive United States.
Another big event coming up in neighboring Germany, where everything is set for the Munich Security Conference. What can we expect to hear this year following the sharp U.S. criticisms to its transatlantic allies the year before?
Yeah, it's amazing that last year you had Secretary or Vice President Vance give the speech of speeches and criticism across the board from many of the 27 members of the EU, many of the 32 members of NATO. This time around, Secretary Rutte here at the NATO Defense Minister meeting, talking about that speech, saying it was a good speech, an important speech. We all learned from the speech. It was a trajectory that we were going to have to be on. So they've all learned that last year, the Trump administration was a month in. This year, the Trump administration is a year and a month in, and they all know it's not going anywhere for basically a little less than 3 years. So they're getting with the program. I think at this Munich Security Conference, Ukraine is still going to be a primary topic, but there's the challenge everybody's having now is that as the belief becomes more solidified that the fighting with respect to Russia and Ukraine, not everything else about the war, but the fighting between the two may end in some respects this year, that now these countries are grappling with, in 1991, when the USSR dissolved, we had what we call the peace dividend. And all these leaders from all these countries said, hey, now we can stop spending this money on defense. We can start spending it on infrastructure and healthcare and education. And they did. And now, the last 5 years, since the invasion on the 24th of February 22 by Russia further into Ukraine, they've all been saying, peace dividend, we got to spend more. Well, when the fighting stops, there's going to be this, and the Munich Security, we're going to start seeing that play out, which is taxpayers and voters are going to say, wait a minute, we've had 5 years of this. We want taxes lower. We want defense spending lower. And NATO leadership, defense war leadership, they're going to be trying to convince their voters and taxpayers, hey, Russia could do this again. And they're not satisfied. So we can't stop. And these people are going to be looking on TikTok, looking at Facebook, looking at Twitter, looking at podcasts, and they're going to see no fighting. And it's going to take a lot to convince them to keep spending. So that's what I think we're going to see the beginning unfold in Munich Security Conference. Everyone's going to talk tough, but the challenge is going to be, as the fighting ends, how do they convince people to keep spending money? And we already have Prime Minister Sanchez of Spain saying no to the 5%, and he said the reason: they would vote me out of office.
John, thank you so much for joining us. As always, very insightful. Thank you for your analysis.
Thank you.
Now, after the break, we'll take a look at the major stories from the region. Stay with us.
Inside Politics delves deeply into the heart of global issues shaping our world today. Join me for your go-to source of political analysis from across the region and beyond.
Welcome back. Top-ranking Iranian officials say that consultations are underway to determine the date and venue for the next round of nuclear negotiations with the United States. A News' Tura Shiralelu has more on that in Tehran.
Senior Iranian officials, including President Masoud Pezeshkian, Secretary of Supreme National Security Council Ali Larijani, as well as Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi, have hinted at ongoing consultations to decide date and venue of upcoming mediated negotiations with the United States. The same officials have termed Washington's conditions of zero enrichment and limiting the range of ballistic missiles to 500 kilometers as excessive demands, which are preventing the talks from reaching a deal. Addressing a nationwide rally in Tehran on Wednesday to mark the 47th anniversary of the 1979 Islamic Revolution, President Pezeshkian said that Iran will not give in to excessive U.S. demands. He said that distrust of West and U.S. hinders progress in the talks, and added that date and venue of next round of talks are under consultations. Also, Security Chief Larijani, who visited Oman and Qatar after the Iran-U.S. talks on Friday, said the date and venue of upcoming talks are not decided, but added that the discussions were good to some extent. In an interview with the Doha-based Al Jazeera TV, he reiterated that Tehran will only negotiate over its nuclear program and that Iran has not received a specific proposal from the U.S. side. And Iran's top diplomat, Araqchi, told reporters on Wednesday that the country's ballistic missiles capability is not a subject on the agenda of the resumed negotiations with the United States. The statements of Iranian officials were made as Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu visited Washington with Iran on the agenda of his meetings with U.S. officials. Turaj Shiralilu, Tehran, Foreign News.
Turkey and Greece have signaled renewed political will to resolve a long-standing dispute over maritime borders during a high-level meeting in Ankara. Greek Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis met with Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, with migration and trade also high on the agenda. Adam Morrow brings more from Istanbul.
Turkey and Greece voiced a shared desire to resolve a decades-long dispute over their maritime borders during a Wednesday visit to Ankara by Greek Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis. After meeting Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, the two leaders presided over the sixth meeting of the Turkey-Greece Cooperation Council, attended by relevant cabinet ministers from both countries. Speaking at a joint press conference, Erdogan described the maritime border dispute as complex but not unsolvable if approached within the framework of international law. He said the issue was discussed openly and sincerely during his one-on-one meeting with the Greek Prime Minister. Mitsotakis, for his part, said he hoped conditions would allow Athens and Ankara to resolve their long-running disagreements over maritime borders in the Aegean and Mediterranean seas. Mitsotakis also noted that east-west migrant flows across the Aegean fell by 60% last year, thanks largely to closer cooperation between Greece and Turkey. The two leaders also reaffirmed their shared goal of boosting bilateral trade to $10 billion annually. In 2023, Athens and Ankara issued a joint declaration stressing their commitment to maintaining friendly relations. Nevertheless, they remain at odds on a range of issues, including their maritime borders in the Aegean Sea, an area believed to contain vast untapped energy resources. Last month, Athens said it reserved the right to extend its territorial waters by up to 12 nautical miles, a move viewed by Ankara as a potential flashpoint for conflict. This is Adam Morrow for A News in Istanbul, Turkey.
A major criminal case has been launched in Azerbaijan against several well-known political figures. Authorities say they plotted with foreign intelligence services to overthrow the government.
Azerbaijan's State Security Service says it has uncovered what it calls a coordinated but multi-layered attempt to seize power with foreign involvement. One strand of the case centers on Abbas Abbasov and Rustam Ibrahimbeyov. Investigators say they co-founded an organization abroad in 2012 known as the Union of Russian Azerbaijani Organizations, also referred to as the Union of Billionaires. According to the indictment, the group was created with the support of foreign special service agencies to influence political processes inside Azerbaijan. Prosecutors allege that around the 2013 presidential election, funds amounting to more than 933,000 manats were channeled to mobilize people from different regions for rallies and mass unrest. A separate part of the case focuses on Ali Karimli, chairman of the Azerbaijan Popular Front Party, and party members including Fuad Gahramanli and Ganimat Zaidov. Investigators claim they held secret communications with representatives of a foreign state seeking organizational support to bring Karimli to power. In return, it is alleged that assurances were given that the country would gradually move towards membership of the Collective Security Treaty Organization. Ali Karimli is also accused of attempting to exploit the July 2020 march in Baku, originally held in support of the army, by instructing supporters to create chaos and seize key state buildings. Former senior official Ramiz Mehdiev faces separate charges of treason and money laundering. Authorities say he sent strategic proposals to foreign intelligence representatives in 2025 and legalized more than 17 million manats of criminal proceeds. Several suspects are currently abroad and have been declared wanted.
The United States says Vice President J.D. Vance's trip to Azerbaijan has strengthened prospects for stability in the South Caucasus. Deputy Secretary of State for Economic Growth Jacob Hellberg, who accompanied Vance, described the visit to Baku as productive. In a post on social media, he said it had laid a solid foundation for regional stability and economic growth. A delegation of American Jewish leaders is visiting Baku this week to strengthen ties between the United States, Azerbaijan, and Israel. The group also met with Azerbaijan's President Ilham Aliyev and other senior officials.
A delegation led by Betsy Bernstein, chair of the Conference of Presidents of Major American Jewish Organizations, is on a 5-day official visit to Azerbaijan. Today, the group visited the Alley of Honor and Martyrs Alley, paying tribute to Albert Agarunov, Azerbaijan's Jewish-born national hero. During their visit, the delegation also held meetings with President Ilham Aliyev and other senior officials. Discussions focused on the strong bilateral ties between the two countries and ways to further expand cooperation.
The delegation highlighted Azerbaijan's long-standing Jewish community and described the country as an example of religious tolerance in a time of rising anti-Semitism globally.
In the thousands of years, over 2,000 years, the Jews have been in Azerbaijan. There have been no cases of anti-Semitism. And we see so much anti-Semitism, so much hatred of Jews around the world, that we also say thank you so much to the people of Azerbaijan for standing with the Jewish people.
Vice President, when he spoke yesterday, the Vice President of the United States, and he talked about how Azerbaijan has been underappreciated. It's important for people to know that the Jewish community in the United States, and we represent the Conference of Presidents of Major American Jewish Organizations, represents the umbrella group for the 50 major Jewish organizations in the United States. And we do appreciate Azerbaijan very much, not just for the strategic relationship, but for the unwavering bonds that we share with the United States, Azerbaijan, and Israel.
The delegation said the joint participation of Azerbaijan and Israel in the Board of Peace Initiative strengthens regional security cooperation and enhances both countries' international standing.
I think it shows that with the leadership of President Trump, the countries in the world that want to make the world a better place can come together to bring about peace. And having Azerbaijan and Israel and so many other countries working towards that goal is so important.
They say the visit aims to further strengthen trilateral cooperation in the months ahead.
Kazakhstan is moving closer to a possible constitutional overhaul. The country is preparing for a referendum on the proposed new constitution next month. The draft text sees changes ranging from the structure of parliament, language provisions, to balance of power. A-News' Fariza Kalimurzina has the details in Almaty.
Kazakhstan is preparing for a nationwide referendum on a new constitution after President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev signed a decree setting the vote for March 15, 2026. Voters will be asked if they approve the draft basic law published on February 12th. The authorities described the drafting process as inclusive. A special constitutional commission worked for several months, holding public hearings, consulting legal experts, and reviewing more than 10,000 proposals submitted by citizens through online platforms. This time, the changes go far beyond earlier revisions. Kazakhstan has amended its constitution repeatedly since the late 1990s, but the current draft rewrites around 84% of the text, effectively replacing the existing constitutional framework. Among the key reforms are a shift from a bicameral parliament to a single-chamber legislature, the introduction of the post of vice president, and the formal establishment of the constitution's supremacy over international treaties. President Tokayev says the overhaul would redistribute powers, strengthen checks and balances, and improve the stability of political institutions. Analysts see the reforms as part of a broader effort to move away from personality-driven rule toward more institutionalized governance, while critics argue that political and civic reforms should advance faster. One of the most sensitive parts of the draft concerns language. The constitution reaffirms Kazakh as the state language, while Russian continues to be officially used in state institutions. A recent wording change replaced the phrase saying Russian is used on equal footing with Kazakh with a softer formulation stating it's used along with Kazakh. Authorities describe the change as technical, but for many it has symbolic weight, reopening debates over identity, sovereignty and the country's post-Soviet legacy. If approved, the new constitution would come into force on July 1st, 2026. The adoption date would also become a new national public holiday. Fariza Kalimurzina, Almaty, A News.
Uzbekistan is set to expand its renewable energy projects in vulnerable communities. The country has plans to attract $230 million to install small solar power stations aimed at boosting local incomes and improving infrastructure. Our Sevilla Rajapova has more.
Uzbekistan plans to install small solar power plants in 1,000 mahallas as part of a broader program to reduce poverty and stimulate regional development. A mahalla is a local neighborhood community that serves as a traditional form of self-governance and social organization across the country. Under the initiative, each community will receive solar photoelectric stations with a capacity of 300 to 500 kilowatts. The facilities are expected to be transferred to mahallas on preferential 7-year terms, allowing them to generate additional income through electricity production. Funding will come from both domestic and international sources. The Fund for Reconstruction and Development is set to allocate $110 million, while another $120 million is expected from international financial institutions, bringing total investment to around $230 million. Officials say the solar rollout forms part of a wider reforms targeting 37 districts and more than 900 mahallas with difficult socio-economic conditions, alongside measures to improve infrastructure, modernize energy networks and support local entrepreneurship. It is Sevilla Rajapova reporting from Tashkent, Uzbekistan, A News.
Well, that's all we had for you for now. Thank you so much for watching and stay tuned to A News.